Assalamu alaikum. I am Arij Mikati, the Managing Director of Leadership and Culture at Pillars Fund, where I have the privilege of leading our storytelling and culture change work. I am delighted to be your host for this evening's conversation, Ramy from Pen to Screen, with our incredible guests, Ramy Youssef, Amir, Sulaiman, and Maytha Alhassen. Today's program is the finale of our first season of Pillars Pop-Up Conversations, an ongoing series designed to highlight the ways American Muslims are using imaginative storytelling and cultural production to advance social change. We have been using this space to gather on Facebook Live with Muslim activists, storytellers, story changers, and others to learn more about their work and how we can all collectively create change. We encourage you to follow us on social media, tweet using the hashtag #PillarsPopUps, and of course, post your comments to the Facebook live stream. Before we begin, for those of you who are not familiar with the Pillars Fund, we are a foundation working to amplify the leadership, narratives, and talents of American Muslims. Pillars staff is responding to the current public health and economic crisis by working closely with our grantee partners as they navigate this shifting terrain and by supporting individual community members. Pillars also recently completed the second round of our Rapid Response Fund for Muslim artists and activists who are experiencing economic constraints brought on or exacerbated by this current moment. Please subscribe to our mailing list and follow us on social media to receive updates as they are announced. And now, without further ado, I am delighted to welcome you to today's program, Ramy from Pen to Screen. When creating his Golden Globe and Peabody Award-winning show about one Muslim Arab American man's experience trying and often failing to be good, Ramy Youssef had a vision. He wanted to tell a story that would, above all else, invite complex discussion with the show's viewers. With 2 daring seasons now available to stream on Hulu and a 3rd in the works, those exciting conversations are far from over. Tonight, we will be taking a rich deep dive into the making of Ramy, where we will explore and answer questions submitted by you, the Muslim community. And as a note, some of our questions have been edited for length and clarity. To start off our program, I am so honored to welcome my friends Ramy Youssef, Amir Sulaiman, and Maytha Alhassen. Hi, y'all.
Oh man, thanks for having us.
Oh my goch, thanks for being here. We're so delighted to have you. Salam alaikum.
Really appreciating the pronunciation Ramy. Is been great.
I gotta do right by you, my man. I gotta do right by you. So to kick us off, actually, I'm just going to tell folks a little bit about all 3 of you. Ramy Youssef is the creator, producer, and star of the hit Hulu show Ramy, for which he recently won the Best Actor in a Comedy Series Golden Globe. No big deal. Ramy's first 1-hour comedy special, Feelings, was produced by A24 and premiered on HBO in June 2019. And season 2 of Ramy premiered on Hulu on May 29th and was recently renewed for a 3rd season. So congratulations to all 3 of you.
Thank you.
Amir Sulaiman is a poet, recording artist, Harvard fellow, actor, screenwriter, and producer born in Rochester, New York. He's performed poetry across the US and many countries throughout the world. And he recently published a book of poetry, Love, Gnosis, and Other Suicide Attempts, which was met with critical acclaim, in addition to his latest album, The Opening. And Maytha Alhassen, PhD, is a historian, journalist, social justice artist, and mending practitioner. Her work bridges the worlds of organizing, academic research, media engagement, artistic expression, and spiritually guided healing practices. As a senior fellow at Pop Culture Collaborative, she authored the 2018 report, Haq and Hollywood, illuminating 100 years of Muslim tropes and how to transform them. So you all are incredibly impressive people with incredibly busy schedules. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited to dig in today because I think one opportunity that we haven't seen as much of yet is having like a true, real dialogue within the Muslim community and having that intra-community conversation just with across the spectrum of different types of Muslims and how they experience the show. So I'm really excited, to have this discussion with you about the show where we're going to keep it all the way real. And I think it's going to be really juicy and spicy and exciting. And I'd love to start with a question that I know all of you often think about, which is, do you write with your audience in mind? And how do you think about your responsibility, if any, to Muslim communities as you tell the story of Ramy?
Thank you again. It's interesting because even even the framing of this conversation, a couple of times you've said the Muslim community, and it's like, what is that? What is the Muslim community? You know, this is not a monolith. We don't say it. I never really hear the Christian community. I think that there is this subtext, an understanding kind of amongst people that there are so many different types of Christians. There are different approaches to Christianity. Was this a Christian from the south of the U.S.? Or is this a Christian in Rome? I mean, we not only are put into a monolith by the outside, but also we refer to ourselves as such as well. And so when we talk about really, do we keep the audience in mind? I think the main thing that we keep in mind is just how different everyone in the audience is. And because of that, I think what we write to as a show is not about this idea of like representing Muslims, because again, that term is it's such a large umbrella that, you know, it would have to be such a different show in order to try and cover that. Honestly, it would probably have to be a documentary. So in order to do it with what we do, what we think about for our audience, we think about the emotional work that we want the show to do. We are building around small moments with characters, and we are looking with all our characters in the places that they hide. You know, the aim of this show is to look at those places, those lonely places, those uncomfortable places, and talk about them in a way that that we feel, you know, can bring something to the conversation that's not there. And I think when we think about this show in it being called a Muslim show, it's also to your framing, which is it's about an Arab Muslim family in New Jersey. But I think if I were to say what this show is actually about, it is about someone who is a believer and is trying to reckon with what they believe and what they actually do, and trying to understand what that is. So in many ways, you could watch this show and be Muslim, be Christian, be Jewish, and you could feel like it was you if that's the struggle you're having. That's what this show represents the most, is someone struggling with that feeling. And we keep that in mind because we want to speak to that. And so what scenarios and what things do we know we've experienced, or do we know our audience has experienced? That's what we're excited to dive into.
Yeah. What I feel like the conversations in the room that we've had about how we want story to emerge and characters have been around what Zahir talks about in the Hawk and Hollywood report, which is having intimate knowledge about that specificity. So in season 1, it's a little bit more about Arab Muslim. In season 2, we bring in the Black Muslim American experience, and really trying to get at the heart of what does it mean to tell this story, not necessarily representationally or authentically, but what does it look like, as Ramy said, to go into the intimate spaces of where knowledge is produced about that person and that community. It means trying to see if certain moments do align with an overall story arc. I mean, were little things like in the room, we had this debate about what an Arab mother who was a boomer would consider the epitome of Hollywood beauty. And so we called up Ramy's mom to verify if it was Julia Roberts, Brooke Shields, Richard Gere. My theory was always that Pretty Woman had this intervention, this massive intervention around aesthetics. And it was confirmed, right? Like, and then we also, there's another Arab Muslim in the room, and we asked him to, not that we had really scientific approaches to that or had sample sizes that would please science, but I think that's how those are the conversations that we would end up having. And it wasn't, how is this going to land for people? What are they going to say? And I mean, clearly we knew that some things would be provocative, but if that was in line with where the character was going, then it wasn't off the table.
Yeah, I think the big emphasis was just really telling the truth. Like, not as much, when we have, a Muslim show or a Muslim musician or a Muslim actor or a Muslim whatever, it's saying kind of in the language, what we're saying is that, this is going to represent all Muslims, and therefore we have to represent the Muslims well, either for our own, like dawah purposes, for our own proselytizing, or to offset the stereotypical and the poor representation that we've had in the past. But for myself as a poet, as a writer, and in the context of the show, it was outside of that polemic. It was outside of that discussion. That the discussion more so was just about telling the truth. And I think for artists in particular, different than politicians or academics or other professions, and I may be biased just because I've been an artist all my life, but that the artist is going to have to tell the truth. Everyone has to tell the truth, but the artist is going to have to tell the hard truth. And if the artist doesn't tell the hard truth, then he's rendered a disservice to all of the community, because the community, everyone doesn't know how to create art. Everyone doesn't know how to sing a song or to write a play or to create a sitcom. And so the right that the community, even if we say this is the community, the right that the community has on us is to tell the truth. The right that and if we tell the truth, whether they like it or not, isn't as important. It's not as important. It's like a person that goes to the doctor, and the doctor only says the things that the person likes to hear. That the doctor is not giving the people, the person that they're serving, their right. That they have the right on the doctor to tell them the truth. And so what we're doing with the show and is to tell the truth. Some of it is very beautiful and very pleasing. Some of it makes us very uncomfortable, even myself. And I'll squirm in the writer's room, like, yeah, but I was like, but it's not a lie. It's not that. I'm not going to hear me say that. I'll be like, yeah, I don't like that, but not a lie. You know what I mean? And that was the yardstick that I used for myself. And what I saw in the room in general was that we're just going to tell the truth instead of pretending to benefit the people by a comforting lie.
Yeah, and the really defined truth, we're dealing with emotional truth. We're not dealing with the space of facts. We are not dealing with the space of education. We are dealing with truthful feelings, and feelings are inherently often factually incorrect, I would say scripturally incorrect, all those things. But they are true in that they are felt, and they are true in that they're shared. And so that's what we're always really trying to zone in on, just to specify even further with Amir's point. And yeah, it's really fun, and it's really, we squirm.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of jumping off that, religion question, Nicole L. wrote to us asking the following. She asks, religion is a taboo subject in Hollywood, but America is the most religious, wealthy Western country, with 55% of American adults saying that they pray daily. And Congress has Muslims, Christians, Jewish people, Hindu folks, and more, but no open atheists. So what do you three think about this disconnect between America at large, who seems to really value religion, and the lack of nuanced, realistic portrayals of religious people on screen?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that, well, firstly, I don't know if anyone is with, my personal belief is, I don't know if anyone is without religion. We've regulated certain types of behaviors or certain type of speech or ritual, what we will call religious, and other things that we will call secular. But say, for example, if we took democracy, American democracy, it can be exported. You can kill someone for it. It's noble to die for it. That there is a text that cannot be violated. The Constitution, like everything has to match that. And people will argue over this matches it or this doesn't match it, but you can't throw it in the garbage. It's blasphemy. There's a religiosity that I think the human heart is just designed to have. There is a way of orienting one's life and one's thoughts and one's resources and one's principles around a quote unquote religion. And I think that as far as what we're saying is like things that are generally understood or explicitly religious, like Islam or Hinduism, or that there is. This is actually kind of funny even to me, but there is an element in the American expression of reality. Maybe it's because of the way that America was founded as an act of rebellion, that there is this holding to this higher principle that is still relatively popular, even among, like you said, among our political figures and our all of our popular figures, for them to pray, or for there to be a prayer at the beginning of a political proceeding, or for people to call the mercy of or the help of God and the blessings of God on America, or for any particular event, that this reaching is still alive and well in America, but it's clashing with the culture of unbridled consumerism. And although two things seem like not related, like how does that necessarily affect a person's religion? Well, with the unbridled consumerism comes infrastructure that has to support that, ideological infrastructure, practical, political, military infrastructure that really is there to not just to allow, but to ensure or to enforce a never-ending consumerism. And that by its nature rivals generally all religious principles, whether if following the example of the Buddha or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the Christ Messiah, or whoever. None of them are big advocates for just endless, relentless, savage consumerism. And so I think there is where we find a clash, where we can find very popular, very lucrative, for example, Christian mega churches and communities, and I can speak even in the Black community about this, but their ability or their desire or their willingness to support the Black agenda, politically there becomes a rivalry there, and it's all based around resources. You know what I mean? So I think that's what creates a kind of clash in the consciousness of the religious American, and the that still holds a certain honor and moral superiority to have that, but at the same time, America having trouble with actually holding up religious principles because it contradicts the real theme of modern America, which is to consume.
And it also, you have to look at the people who are creating the content that goes on TV. I have found that, especially with this group that has been making this show, we are people who are practicing Muslims. This isn't like a cool thing we say. We're all, so many of these stories and these feelings come from our real experiences. I think what you find in Hollywood is, and this speaks to the way our religious institutions don't foster artists. A lot of the artists who end up being creators are not rooted in their faiths because there was no path for them to do this kind of work. And it's a bit of a betrayal of our history. If you look at Islamic history, there is poetry that speaks on things in so many different ways beyond topics that I mean, like, if you want to talk about sexual themes, just look at poetry from the era. If you want to look at Islam before colonialism, and you want to look at the types of conversations being had through art and the way that artists were part of a valuable society, without that being a contradiction to the faith. And then you look at the attitude around being a creative person, around being an artist, within any of the religious communities in this country, and you get your answer. You get the answer as to why you're not seeing any characters that have any sort of respect for faith. It's a really clear, result of no seeds being planted with any of those intentions. When you stop the art, you're not going to get it. And so I think what you have with our show, and we talk about lines that we're constantly dealing with and things that we're looking at, are we going to cross them? Or are we not going to cross them? Our number one rule on this show is we are not going to question the faith. We put everything on our characters. We are not sitting here doing a critique of Islam. In this show, actually, every character is trying to live up to the standards, the ideals, to the message of the faith. Messing up, they're messing up trying to do it, but that's their goal. And I think the reason you don't see that reflected in the media, again, is because our communities are not fostering honest art, and that'll give you, that'll give you what the nature of that question was. That's going to be your answer. That's why you don't see it.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Ramy. And even what you were saying about the historical precedent for artists. I mean, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself would often invite poets to the pulpit. So there is not only, a precedent from the era, but a precedent from, our most glorified Prophet ﷺ. So I really appreciate that point. Also, I mean, to talk about institutions supporting artists, Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, was a state-sponsored artist. He was taught the sciences and he was taught poetry through the Ottoman state institution as a whole. So we used to have those practices. And then now, as Ramy was saying, we fell by the wayside. But I also want to add that America is a pretty schizophrenic country. As America was founded in an act of rebellion to free all men, they entrenched slavery, they genocided people. And then this goes all the way up with this idea of a separation of church and state. It's kind of this binary that emerges in Europe around the decoupling of science and mysticism. And so now we live with this integration. So it's actually very hard for us to see the relationship of a spiritual, mystical world, science, and how art can tell that story. And so here we are trying to make sense of all that dismemberment coming together. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of that point that I think each of you are making around just the struggle that your characters are, the jihad, if you will, that your characters are going through in the show, trying to live up to the faith. We got a question from Abdul Karim A, who wrote in saying that the Uncle Nassim episode was amazing, and that he found the episode extremely necessary, not just because of its emphasis on the difficulties that LGBTQ members and Muslim communities face, but also because of the way it emphasizes how internal turmoil can manifest. This episode, to this person who wrote in, made Uncle Nassim even more of a complex character than he was last season. And he observed that last season he seemed more like a bully making demeaning and sexist comments, but was also complex because he was the person who showed more chivalry than anyone else by trying to help the woman who was being abused by her partner in the street. Now, in this season, some of his statements seem more like him projecting his own insecurities, possibly. So we're curious, was Uncle Nassim always written as someone who is gay, or was that added to his character this season? And why was that an important identity to give the character?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that excites me about what we've been able to do with his character is it speaks to the nature of what I really love about TV, which is the story's not done. These are small chapters. We haven't seen everything about our characters, and this is a show that's built, inshallah, where we get to do more seasons. And I think that's always kind of been in mind for us. We aren't trying to kind of resolve everything all at once, and things are left open-ended. And I think with a character like his, it's been really cool to get to grow him. To directly answer that point, I think it was something that we started to feel was going to be where we were headed towards the end of the first season. We started talking about it, and we were, and part of it came from seeing the show come to life, and we've been so fortunate because we have an amazing cast, and you get on set, for me, as the writer, as the director, I'm there and I'm changing things and shifting things as we're seeing it with people, and then it inspires even more ideas. And so we almost discovered it. It almost was like, oh wow, we looked at what we kind of made, or we thought we made, but so many of these things are, it's like finding something that somehow already exists, and it kind of slowly dawns on you, and a lot of the scenes dawn on us in that way too, where we're like, oh, this is what happened. But it's weird because we're writing it, but it's almost like a fact. It's like a fact that's there that we discovered because we're really trying to take the character, or take the scene, or take the show to where it's supposed to go, and not necessarily where we thought it was going to. So that evolution of that character, the complexity, that feels like real life. That feels like many of our relationships, where it's, man, how could someone be so frustrating in one area, but then be so reliable in another area? And how could I love somebody so much while they simultaneously hurt me? And how can, we look at a character who is not only dealing with something that's not acceptable to talk about, but it's that subject, but it's also how he deals with it. And we see his anger, we see all that, but so much of that episode is about emotional eating, is about, the way that we can try to pacify our feelings with just food even. And obviously food's a huge part of our culture in a beautiful way, but it's also looking at how, if you don't talk about something, you could weaponize something as beautiful as food. And so that starts to be, it's just really fun to look at, again, those feelings, Yeah.
I don't need to tell you that, conversations around homosexuality in the Muslim community, like many other faith communities, is complex and tense and ever evolving. So I'm curious, what message would you want to deliver to those who experience discomfort with the inclusion of a gay character on your show?
I think so much of what we're doing, again, in how we build this show is built around asking questions. So it's even to say, what message do you want to deliver? It's more, what questions do we want to ask? Because we're not a message delivery show. We, in many ways, even by design, especially in the second season, let's say even the Ramy character, this isn't someone to look up to. And I think that's really important for us, because we don't want this work to be instructional. And part of that is because we, again, care about our faith, care about the faith that is portrayed in this show, that is of these characters. And so this is not about being instructional. It's about asking questions. And so it's about saying, look, when it comes to this character who's homosexual, when it comes to the reality of, there are people in our communities, various communities, by the way, this is not a Muslim community specific thing. This, and it's even weird to call it an issue. This is how people are and how people can be. And so when we're not asking these questions, and when we're not only not asking the questions, but we've weaponized that identity to the point where there are people who choose to end their lives because they don't feel like they can talk about a feeling they have, when there are people who now start to feel like there's no path for them to even be part of the faith at all because of how they feel, and there's no conversation around it. These are the kinds of things that tear families apart. And for people who care about the faith, these are the kinds of things that just draw people away from the faith completely. And so when we're not asking these questions, and we're not having these conversations, it hurts all of us. And that's all we're trying to say. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't have an answer. I don't have a ruling. I don't have anything. I'm more interested in bringing people closer to what is very clearly a reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's going back to this talking about just telling the truth, and Ramy specifying just telling an emotional truth. And yeah, there wasn't any, I don't remember any conversation in the room, with practicing Muslim. Was it about a scriptural issue or a religious legality issue? Or it wasn't that. It was just what Ryan was saying was like, this person exists, and what does this person, what is this person experiencing, and let's open it up, and so yeah, the only kind of instructional thing is just like, don't be like Ramy. That's the basic instruction of this. That's the only instruction. It's like, what would Ramy do, and then do the opposite of that. but other than that, it's just like you said, just asking questions and just opening. It shows about Muslim people with emphasis on the people part of the Muslim person. So it's just like, this person exists. Let's open it up and like see what it's like to be in their shoes for a few minutes. This person exists. Let's open it up and see what like they're in their shoes. And by way of that, we give just more space for more discussions and conversations. And again, the role of art is, in my opinion, more to do that. There's other people that have, definitive, answers to definitive questions, and none of us are claiming or even have the ambition or audacity to take on that role. So we just want to open things, you know what I mean? And for people to, being alone, it's really interesting. Like, being alone can be really, can be deadly, but that's not the worst of it. Being alone can be hell in the most literal sense of the term that I can find. So, and again, this isn't about like halal haram, but if I'm caught up in something, even if I'm like, oh, this is wrong, I'm caught up in drinking, or I'm caught up in some other thing, but I'm the only one that God created that has this problem. The problem in relationship to the larger problem of what it is to be unwitnessed, or to be ununderstood or misunderstood, or those things can lead to larger things. I don't know why my phone keeps going. Those things can lead to larger things that can, like, for example, something that's agreed upon is generally a bad idea is, for example, killing yourself, or leaving the faith altogether, regardless of whatever, even if it's something that's agreed upon, this is wrong, you're not supposed to do this. And Ramy is in the show, the character is doing all the wrong things. And but the noble thing about that character, and what attracted me to the show, even as a writer, I was attracted to this show, not to writing for television. I didn't have like the ambition of writing for television and having that as a career goal. It was this show that I wanted to write. It's because he just doesn't give up. And many other people that may have the same of spiritual elements that he has in the show, they would just give up. You know what? I just can't, and just stop. But he just keeps going and keeps like putting more chips on the table and pushing harder, and being more desperate and finding the path and finding God and finding the truth that he's looking for. And that, I think, if anything, we would love to make a space for people to say, like, if Ramy didn't give up, then maybe I can make it, maybe, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Like that Reddit thing I sent you.
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, yeah, please mention that. This is the best thing. This is the best thing that anyone can say to me. This is the best thing. I couldn't remember if it was private or not. It wasn't a private message, right?
Anyway, it wasn't what?
No, I was thinking about it, but I didn't mention it because I couldn't remember in what context you told me if it was something private.
It was like someone posted on Reddit, I took my shahada because of Ramy, but his reasoning was, I thought I was too much of a mess up, but if he's still a Muslim, then I definitely can be. And
he said I could be a better. He was like, I'm for sure I could be a better Muslim than Ramy. It's like, because he was around other religious people. Then there was like their discipline, their honor, and their faith. It would intimidate him, so he didn't want to become Muslim. But he was like, but this guy, hey, if I'm better than one Muslim, I'm better than this guy. Yeah,
you know, there's got to be a bar somewhere.
Yeah. That's great, man. That's great.
That's awesome.
Great. Yeah, and even religiously, you know, even as far as our scholarship is concerned, setting the bar low is really more consistent with the message of Muhammad.
Absolutely.
You set the bar as low as possible. The high bar, that's something that, I don't know, we've made up. I don't know where exactly, when and where we preferred that. We set, you know, high goals, you know, so you could just lofty things to attain.
Aspire to.
We make the bar as low as possible. And this is the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the practice and the way and the preaching and the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is to set the bar as low as possible, to the point he says, whoever says la ilaha illallah enter Jannah. He says, go tell the people, to his companion, go tell. And he was like, yeah, I can't tell them, because if I tell them that, they're just going to do all kinds of things and just say la ilaha illallah. In this one, he kept it secret until he was on his deathbed. And then on his deathbed, he said, okay. So the Prophet said, you know what I mean? And but that's the affair. You know, we try to set the bar low, and that's what Ramy's doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Appreciate that. So in season 1, The Atlantic reviewed the show and said flatly that Hulu's Ramy missed the mark on Muslim women. And Maytha, you were integral to the writing team this year. Notably, you wrote the episode that focused on Dina this season. Do you think that the show got it right this time around? And as a consultant on season 1, do you think the criticisms of season 1 were fair?
Yeah, I want to start with season 1 first.
Yeah.
And the article that was written, it's by Shamira Ibrahim. And the basic premise is that Muslim men are seen in a sympathetic light, and you get to see with wit, with interesting foray into their lives, the diversity of emotional experiences. And her framing was that Muslim women were living unfulfilled dreams. But in reality, most of the characters were, especially with their sex lives. I mean, even in the Maytha episode, when you are taken into the world of her, I would argue, God-shaped void of loneliness, that comes out of being displaced from community with a place that had always honored community back home, and then being taken to, spoiler alert, the final scene where she thinks she's going to have an intimate experience with her husband, and then that gets disrupted because of television. Both of them are not having a deep, fulfilling experience. And I think that there are some projections onto those stories. So, you know, for me, the Dina episode, I wasn't in the writer's room, but I thought for season 1, it was a very interesting exploration of desire and sexual aspiration. And especially carving out this weird world of what it means to not wear a headscarf and the kind of expectations that somebody should have. Like, one of her contentions was that being in a scene where she was physically vulnerable with somebody and he asks her what sex positions she preferred, her response was any of them, all of them. And she thought it was unrealistic that somebody Dina's age wouldn't know. Well, there are so many women who come from a place of silence around sex that it's not unheard of. I mean, to the point where there's articles written about women who, because sexual experience desire is so repressed, physically have issues with having sex. So that is not so unheard of. I do think too that there was a nuance she missed. And that is having Arab women characters and their storytelling for the first time on screen as main characters. And for the amount of real estate that was given in 10 episodes for 2 Muslim women, for a mother's story, for a young adult story of what it means to constantly be contrasted and do things right, and then see that Ramy gets the sexual liberation that she doesn't, but also seeing that that's unfulfilling for him too. I haven't seen anything like that on television. In fact, I would challenge anybody to show me a young adult Arab woman that's ever existed on television as a main character. It's never happened. And even the woman who plays Maytha, Hiam Abbas, started out in Succession and then became part of the wallpaper throughout the rest of the season. We continue to look and explore the depth of the loneliness that she carries, not knowing how to fit in, carrying generations of trauma around not being perfect enough or not getting to fulfill her dreams, and placing that onto Dina. And I think in season 2, we did see a little bit more of that relationship between mother and daughter that I hope in season 3 we get to see even more of, because there's something really precious about that kind of bonding that ends up happening at the end of Maytha's episode. So I would say that I actually really appreciated the other article that she did for The Atlantic about this idea that Ramy constantly talks about, of what people want to be and who they actually are. And I think if you start using that framework, which, you know, is something Aisha of Damascus had said a long time ago, which is that sincerity is when your inward actions and your outward actions match. And so this idea that they're striving for that, but the problem is an investment in the public performance of piety, or as we say in Arab culture, what will people think?
Heard of it?
That, yes, that obsession clearly, it whittles away at your soul's journey. And so we get to see that the machinations of that for most of the characters. And I mean, I don't know, I've never seen an Evil Eye episode in my life. And being able to hear the recitations by Randa Jarrar's character in season 2 to do healing work was powerful. And I got so many responses from not just Arab women, not just Muslim women, but women from other faith traditions that in some secret place held on to the, what do you call it, hidden magic or hidden miracles within faith tradition. And so we got to see a little bit of that too.
I'll also say too, I mean, I think a lot of those conversations, especially when we were crafting, I mean, Maytha, we went down, you know, I mean, like with any story, but obviously like we went down a lot of paths with Dina, and ultimately kind of the thing that felt the coolest for us was landing on this, especially this season, the story we landed on, because it was real to our actress, to May, and what that character was going through. And so I think with so much of this stuff, we're constantly, you know, we want it to feel honest to the voice of the show and to what we think these characters might be going through. And we use a lot to find that. You know, it's obviously people in the room, but it's also our actors, and it's also how it fits into the larger story and what's going on. So we're constantly like trying to be as thoughtful as we can with crafting that stuff. And I think this show has enough going on in it that you can pretty much draw whatever conclusion that you want. Like if you want to look at this show and say, this is a Hollywood agenda to make Muslims look bad, you'll see that. If that's what you want to see, you'll see that. If you want to watch this show and you want to say, whoa, this is a show about people really depicting real struggles, and whoa, they actually never question the faith, which, you know, we don't, you can say, oh, wow, I do see that too. There's a lot of data here. And in a way, the things that bother people about the show, or the things that people gravitate towards to in the show, says a lot about where the audience member is in many ways. And that's what we enjoy about making the show, because we're not trying to be preachy. If we were, you would know exactly what we meant for you to get. What we're actually doing is trying to show people as messy as possible, so that you reflect with the parts that do reflect with you. You are triggered by what triggers you. You feel seen by what you didn't know other people felt, you know, again, in the place that you hide. So what ends up happening, I think, with that in mind, is that the audience is in a really unfair position. So as we start putting this show out, the audience has never seen, at least in a major way. I'm not disrespecting other artists who have put stuff out, but if we're going to say an Arab Muslim family centered show that is getting Hollywood play in the way that our show is, even though we're a very small show, we haven't seen that before. And so there is a lot projected onto it and what we want it to be just as an audience. So I feel for the audience, because the problem is the marketing, and the problem is the scarcity that currently exists. Right. So if there's marketing that's like, this is the Muslim show, and then you watch it and you're like, what? You know, like, again, like this goes back to the first thing we talked about in this conversation, the umbrella of Muslim and what comes under it. It's disrespectful to call this the Muslim show, because right. that's so inaccurate. And there's nothing that comes out that says this is the white show. There's nothing that comes out that says this is even the Jewish show. There are so many shows that go into Jewish culture throughout various different people. And I would argue too that there are even less Jewish people in the world, obviously, versus Muslim people. But it's not even a numbers game. It's more like, why do we not get the amount of diversity and the amount to say, well, we want different stories? And so again, part of our approach here is we don't want to tell every story, because the truth is that allows on an industry level for them to say, well, they already covered it on Ramy. But no, it's like, you can watch Ramy and say, I want a show around Dina. I want a show around a Dina type. And that's amazing. That's an amazing desire. It's also a different show. And so we're not necessarily doing women poorly just because the star of the show is not a woman. And we're very aware of how we're constructing what we're constructing. We want to stay in our lane, because it's honestly out of respect to the art that's to come, because there are people who like are going to cover these characters and these topics much better than I can. Like if there's a Dina show, a type Dina, like that needs to be led by women who have really not only lived that body, but hidden in that body and loved in that body and prayed in that body in a way that I haven't. But the stuff that I'm able to do is that really specific stuff that, you know, goes around my character. And of course, we do a lot to, like Maytha said, shoot out into other episodes. That was a fight I had in the first season of a show called Ramy. I'm not in 3 episodes, you know, and that's wild, you know, especially for a network being like, what are you talking about? This isn't how this works. But I think because the audience is in the position that they're in, when I hear feedback like that, when I hear critique like that, it doesn't upset me. You know, I get it. I like, if I wasn't in a position to make things and I'm just watching something and this is all I get, and I have a feeling like this might be the only thing I get, yeah, I'd be pissed.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, that you know, another character that I'm hearing a lot of deep interest in is Zainab, and hearing her story. And we've been in the room thinking through, what does it mean to be a daughter of a sheikh? And you get to see a little bit of that played out. There's so much more to dig into that character, and that character like that also deserves a show unto itself. But I want to clarify what Ramy was saying about Meg Halamawi's own story for that episode. She was losing her hair, and we rewrote the entire script that we had during shooting to reflect what was going on. But it was also an amalgamation of stories. So the pickup truck is something I experienced to some degree. I wasn't wearing a headscarf at the time, but we were imagining so many different scenarios at the end. But the idea too of having a Latinx conservative arguing guy at the other end was also important for us to show that we get this from other people of color too. And also for me, what I was thinking about was the Nabra Hassanen story. It was an undocumented Latinx person who grabbed her and killed her, you know, and sexually assaulted her. So there's so much to pull from within our own real true stories and things that we've seen emerge through the media that might have not been dealt in a way that is precious or gracious?
Yeah, that's a great segue, Maytha, because you talked a little bit about how, it's even sometimes different communities of color that can harm one another. And I think obviously this season there was a whole new element brought in, and you entered into the creation of season 2 knowing that one critique of your first season was the invisibilization of Black Muslim characters. And so I'm curious, that goes both ways. It's not just that we experience harm from other communities, but as Arabs, we certainly perpetuate harm to other communities as well. And so having that context, what considerations did you have about the depiction of Black Muslims as you shaped the story of season 2, as you knew that, you were going to have this amazing gift in having Mahershala be on the season?
I want to kick to Amir on this because obviously he's a big part of the core of the Sheikh Ali character. And, anyone who has kept up with how we made this show in the second season, Amir is a tentpole of and the guy. It's so exciting. Like the stuff we got to make is like it really it surpasses dreams.
Yeah. I do want to say too that, Amir, I feel like as someone who knows your work, like watching the show, I could hear the lines that you wrote in the show, which was really, really cool to experience.
Yeah, he wrote most of Steve's dialogue.
It's so your voice.
The Sheikh Ali stuff is me. Here's the Steve stuff. Like when Steve, the line, there's a lot of Steve stuff. Wow. But I just because it's so it's not even to be confrontational about this, but to say that the show did an invisibilization of Black Muslim characters, these are the types of critiques that I think I can handle them, so I'm fine. Like I never, I'm not like going on Twitter being like whatever. Like it's mostly like I get it. Again, I get where the audience is at. But just because something's not shown doesn't mean it's being minimized. It's hard to show everything, and I think it's really important for characters to grow and for stories to grow organically. And I don't want other artists who are trying to make stuff under the Muslim umbrella or under whatever umbrella that they're in to feel like if something's not being shown that they are committing some sort of violence. What you need to do is honor the story that's in front of you. You do the best that you can. And again, with TV, stories grow and they get a chance to continue to grow. So for us, imagine we tried to tackle everything under the sun and we were like, you know what, let's do the Black Muslim experience in season 1, even though that's not what I am. I imagine we would have done such a poor job doing that there's no way we would have attracted Mahershala Ali. Mahershala Ali is excited in this show. Amir is excited in this show because we did what we were doing and set out to do as honestly as we could. And the same thing happens with, any character that we're going to continue to introduce. It's we have to pace ourselves and we have to do it in a way that honors what we're saying. And that I think leads to a big part of how we created stuff with Amir, because I think Amir, what was so cool is the pace that he does his poems and the pace that he has crafted his career really matched with how I like to make the show. And I think that's what's been really cool about this collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, my excitement about the show, and like you said, along with Mahershala, was that, it does well what it's supposed to be. Like it is what it's supposed to be very well. And, for any artist, or in my opinion, any human that sees someone that's authentically human, that's authentically themselves, even if their self is different than yourself, it's something beautiful and special to witness. So the show is so specific, it's so particular. I think it's one of the things I said about the show, maybe more than anything else, is that how specific and particular it is, and not trying to pretend like it's something that it's not in order to, please one person or another person. Like, for example, I was born Muslim, and I remember the first time I saw a white Muslim. I didn't even know white people could be Muslim. I don't know, as a kid, I don't know how I got that idea, but I just thought that Black people were Muslim. So even when I see Black people who weren't Muslim, I would assume that they were Muslim. And I thought white people, so one time a white person came into the masjid and I was like, like he's lost. Like, what is he doing? Like, why is he bowing and prostrating and stuff? This is weird, So I've had that experience. And also I've had the experience of being on Hajj, and, you're meeting so many people on Hajj, and someone from some other place in the Muslim world is saying, you're born Muslim. Yeah, I'm born Muslim. And they say, you're from America? Yeah, I'm from America. You're Muslim? It's like, yeah, I'm literally in Ihram. I'm at the Kaaba, and they're asking me if I'm Muslim. And they don't mean it to say that I can't be Muslim. It's just outside of their view. You know what I mean? And so many things are outside of all of our views. So that's the first thing. But I don't want to spend too much time on that idea, because that just is a matter of fact, that you can't have everyone be seen in any form of art, or in anything. Everyone can't be seen at the same moment. When I'm brought in to add onto the show, and Mahershala and I entered into the room on the same day, as a matter of fact. And the importance for me of making sure to get that character right is another thing that I was inspired by Ramy's emphasis on wanting to do this right, and his humility to say that I maybe am not the one to be able to get this right by myself. If he, for example, like he said, tried to do it in the first season himself, then I think that would have been a real wasted opportunity. And I think, of course, Mahershala coming on board and myself to be able to help in that is something, again, that made it worthwhile for me. Because like I said, my ambition is not to be a great television writer. That's not what it was. But to tell the story was very, very
television writer.
What's that?
I said, but you are a great television writer, nonetheless.
MashaAllah, you're so kind. But again, even in creating these characters, crafting these characters, it's like, I'm not even going to be able to show all of Black American Islam. Like, who Sheikh Ali is a very peculiar, particular, and in some way a minority in the Black Muslim spectrum of Islamic practice. But he is who he is because he's an individual. He's not an icon, or he's not a placeholder for a million people. He's just one person. And this is why that character can resonate, because he's one person, his daughter is one person, and leaving at that without trying to make him every Black Muslim,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this won't surprise you, but we received many questions on the topic of Black characters, non-Black Arab, anti-Blackness, and the way they're portrayed in the show. Some viewers, like Ruqayya, perceived Black characters on your show as being really smart and sophisticated and religious, but also a little gullible and maybe easily talked into problematic decisions, perhaps even flirting with the magical Negro trope and the way that they interact with Ramy through some of the season. She also noted that from her perspective, the writing really leaned into the anti-Blackness of non-Black Arabs. She heard characters like Maytha and Uncle Nassim spewing racism, but didn't really feel they were challenged on their anti-Blackness beyond the superficial. Now, on the other end, we had folks that wrote to us like Abdul Karim A, who felt that the show did not go far enough with portraying the anti-Blackness of the non-Black Arab characters, finding that it was too subtle and seeing it as a missed opportunity. So it turns out that art is still subjective, still a thing. So I'd love to hear, and I have a sense of perhaps what you might see here, but can you talk a little bit about why you chose to shape the Black characters integral to the season this way, how you thought about avoiding tropes like the magical Negro trope, and why you portrayed the anti-Blackness of the Arab characters in the ways that you did this season?
Yeah, if I could just mention something about it, that the magical Negro trope is one that's always really fascinating to me, because like, even if you look at, say, Othello, who is this general, very intelligent, courageous, noble, has all these great characteristics, but he's been outwitted by this Iago, by this like little shaitan. And then we find, that replayed in many ways. Obviously, we don't have to go down a bunch of examples, And this may be really challenging. I don't know who to be challenging more for Black Muslims or for non-Black Muslims, but like the Black American Muslim is a peculiar thing, and the Black American is a very peculiar thing. As the Black American, this is going to require more nuance than we have time for, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Black American, in a way, doesn't have a history. They're like Jason Bourne. Like they just wake up and there's this vague feeling that there's this history, but they have all these great abilities, but they can't quite trace to exactly where they came from. So in a way, they've created a new people. And Imam Wafdi Muhammad, rahimahullah, talks about this, that the Black American people, his community, are a new people on the planet Earth. Because there are new people on the planet Earth, it has some benefits and some liabilities. And so the benefits are that it lends them a type of purity, a type of religious innocence that allows them to engage the doctrine of Islam in a very pure way, not bogged down by cultural baggage, in a way that many other people in the world, in the Muslim world, cannot. And they have a genuine openness to all Muslims, like especially if you find a new Black American Muslim, and especially in the conversions that happened, for example, when I was young in the 90s and so on, there was like to see another Muslim wherever they were from, they were instantly your brother in a real way. And we would be confused when we would give salams to someone and they wouldn't return the salams because they didn't see us as Muslim. This would baffle us. But this purity allows for an ability for spiritual ascension and a very ability to attach to the principles of Islam, but it also leaves us vulnerable for cultural baggage that we don't understand as part of Islam that comes with people from the other parts of the Muslim world. And that's caused a lot of damage in the Black American Muslim community, that the Black American Muslim community was, for example, always very socially engaged. That was part and parcel of Islam. So when you have people like Muhammad Ali, you have the people like Malcolm X, rahimahullah, that you find in these people their Islam and their political engagement and them taking care of their neighborhood and taking care of people was all one. It was all one. But then with the influx of Black Americans kind of leaving that off for preference of this, foreign Islam that they thought was more pure because it was geographically closer to the source, it handicapped a lot of that. And that was because of us forgetting ourselves and forgetting the special gift that Allah gave to us as a community, and for us to leaving some of these great gifts to the side. And so this particular character is not, again, to represent all of Black America, Muslim America at all. But this scenario between him and Ramy and his daughter is, again, it's there may be some things we like about it, things we dislike about it, but it is not a lie, and it's based on real occurrences that I witnessed and lived through myself. Mm-hmm. So, but this element of Black people, and not just the Black Muslim, but Black people in general, it is some of the way that Black people have been overcome by more manipulative and more quote unquote sophisticated people, such that we're ready to forgive. We're ready to, the guy shoots up a church, kills people in church, and the first thing that the people say is, "We forgive you and we invite you to." This is Black people, mashallah, for all of the beauty in it and for all of the harm that it opens Black people up to. But it does allow for a spiritual capacity that comes easy to Black American people that I love and honor, and I wanted to demonstrate some of that in Mahershala's character.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in about the conversations around anti-Blackness in the Arab community that is portrayed on the show in both seasons. Actually, there's a moment where Maytha's character in the lift says something anti-Black, and we have a term for it now, microaggressions. And we wanted to think about how people would respond. Mahershala stands his ground in responding to Uncle Nassim's crazy assertions that he must have learned Arabic in prison. That's where he converted, again, not shaming anybody who does, but that is like his primary assumption. And then Mahershala shooting back around Arab-owned liquor stores in predominantly Black neighborhoods. And it's real that a lot of us don't challenge our family. And that's why we are in this moment where we've had these discussions, we've had these incredibly simplistic posts that direct you and are instructional around how to talk to your family, disrupt a conversation where the A word is used, or disrupt anything that is racist. So that's something that is actually not that common, that people from within your family are going to push back a little bit more. But that moment of the families coming together, the families meet moment, there are at least 2 actors on our show that have had that same exact moment with Black folks who became a part of their family. And there was something that rang true to them about those moments and how long the period of getting to know each other was. So again, I think we with every little thing we drop, with Maytha saying, Zainab looks like Beyonce because of her hair and she's wearing a headscarf. That sort of stuff is sitting in for a much bigger conversation, right? And that's what we are gesturing towards. Clearly, this is a conversation that I had with Ramy, which was so illuminating about how to write characters for a lot of us that are not coming into the room, which we were going back and forth around the tow truck driver scene and what it meant for Dina to respond back. And clearly, like, my insertions initially sounded like academic arguments versus like, what would you do in the heated moment where you feel like your life was at risk, right? Would you shoot back with references to Angela Davis about prisons? No, you wouldn't. You would have a gut reaction in that moment. So I think it'd be interesting for people to review what they saw and think about like what it means to be emotionally rooted in the moment that those conversations emerge.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, there's what you want to see in the show, right? And so, like you said, some people might think we didn't go far enough with showing the anti-Blackness, and then some people say, like, why did you, there's always going to be a flip. The same thing can happen with the Dina character. So if there's a critique, why are the women's storylines only about sex? Well, the show is about sex in many ways, in the same way that it is about faith. If the women's stories weren't about sex, the critique would be, why is sex only for the men? And if the sheikh, if we go out of our way, because look, we talked about the magical Negro trope a lot.
Yeah.
In the room, we're on the internet, we're aware of it. We're not, in a hole. We're also trying to create a sheikh that feels like a real sheikh. And so a sheikh that feels also like a real human. But the thing is, sheikhs are very spiritual, and good ones are very spiritual. I would rather create a real sheikh who is, like many sheikhs, blinded by the love that he has for his student, because that is essentially Sheikh Ali's flaw. His flaw is his love, is that he would love his student enough to feel that his student could be okay enough for his daughter, who he also loves, who he has to trust her, because trust is also love. And that's what gets us into where we're at. And so you could call it gullible, but you could also call it someone who is, really embodying the principles of the faith, of like allowing someone to have newness, allowing someone to be forgiven, allowing someone to take a new path and to try and do things the right way. And so it would almost be like, to the outward, person, the Ramy character is doing all the right things. And so for the sheikh, if he somehow knew Ramy wasn't, or kind of wanted to, that would make him magical. If he was like, no, I can see through, like, that's more magical than being like, oh, okay, like, you know, you have taken the steps and you are doing the work. And so I just think that it's one of those things where, again, we wanted to create a shape that we all talked about how we've never seen a religious leader on screen that's genuine, a religious leader that isn't like, you know, ripping off the church or doing drugs or is an abuser or any of these things that get put onto anyone who's religious. We wanted to make this a character who feels real and feels enlightened, and he's certainly not magical to me, especially with the last moment that he has with Ramy. And so I think anytime I've heard that critique, I mean, people brought that critique off of a 1-minute trailer. I do think often an audience is waiting to just say a critique without even actually looking at what's really there with the work. And then sometimes critiques are very valid, and we're certainly not exempt from that. But we put a lot into this character, you know, and making sure that, again, he felt like our teachers.
Yeah, I mean, I can say, you know, from my experience, he certainly feels a lot like a couple of my teachers. So it was very relatable for me to watch, and I really appreciate the character. So Ramy,
I want to say one more thing, actually,
of course.
One more thing about the style of our show. It is for a certain audience member, and so we're not spelling everything out. I think there's this moment in season 1 when Maytha has a passenger in her lift, and she makes it, you know, Maytha's always referencing Beyonce when she meets Black people.
Yes.
And she says something to her passenger, and it's very clear that this passenger was hurt.
Yeah, so pretty macro aggressive.
It's pretty clear
yes.
In the visual language of cinema, because this is a TV show, that we said something without having to actually spell out the words. And so it's on the audience to kind of be like, oh, that's not okay. We don't need to spell it out, because then that becomes a different genre of TV show. I mean,
that's a PSA versus a TV show.
You know, watch something else where like, they really spell out the message for you. But like, we're making a show for an educated audience. This is an audience that is either, you know, finding it on Hulu, which means they not only have one streaming app, they probably have 3, or they're illegally downloading it, which means they're super smart. And so they're figuring out how to get here. You can understand the tone of what we're doing. That's not, you know, it's not that hard to see that we're not condoning it. We're showing life as it is.
I really appreciate that. And Ramy, I know the 2nd season of the show premiered the weekend after the brutal and violent murder of George Floyd. What was it like to drop this bold conversation, you know, and starting in some ways pot stirring season into that context, knowing that you had already made it and many of the tensions present in the show were hyper relevant and the stakes were even higher? I'm curious, what choices did you make while promoting the show as a result?
We kind of didn't promote the show for a while. I think it was just kind of this thing where, like, you know, we wanted to shift our lens to what was happening. And the people who are doing amazing work. I mean, one of Maytha and I's really good friends, Patrice Cullors, obviously has been leading this conversation for a really long time. We did a few things with some of the media space that we had to try and center her and center the conversation she was continuing to have, and really kind of wanting to point people in that direction. And so that's something that, you know, and Maytha can speak, you could speak to this too. I mean, I think that's something that we pretty much talked about right away when the show, we almost just like dropped the show and then almost didn't care about the show.
We had a lot of things that we imagined could happen that week when we were dropping the show, especially since Eid was a couple days before, and then the show was about to be dropped. But of course, all those things were concentrated in a week's time. And with the liquor store owner being a Palestinian Muslim, the corner store, it felt like it was a time to really use the mic to highlight the struggle that Black Lives Matter movement for Black lives has been at the forefront around. And I want to just give the details of one of the things that I think was probably a big media moment. Ramy was on with Seth Meyers, and he brought in Patrice to do a conversation, which I think, again, I'm reticent to use the term first, but I believe it was the first time that there was a primetime discussion on defund the police. And then what ended up happening was more folks wanted to start to have this conversation in a mainstream space. So with a little bit of, you know, Ramy being amazing in his improv, and having serious conversation around defund, an audience was gripped into that conversation through the vehicle of potential promo for our show. So it felt like a really clear moment to do that. And we still have some other things you should tune into that we're going to be doing with groups like Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. And we want to continue to highlight those stories and voices that since we have this platform, let's do it. And let's get into the conversations that were small moments and start to deconstruct them. And I think one of the things, unfortunately, that was missing that we've been trying to find the space for is for people to talk about what they're watching. And hopefully at some point there will be a cipher of sorts where people can work out all those things. And I think this is the comment that I've seen, is that people emerge with so many feelings. They don't know how to categorize them. They don't know how to distill them to make sense of them. And because the show is not weekly, you don't know where people are at. It's not like there could be a Twitter conversation around what people just watched. So they're looking for some of those spaces. Ramy shared this great dating app profile like last season. Do you remember this? Where this dude came on to Minder and said, I'm not necessarily religious, but I just watched Ramy and I need somebody to talk to.
I think I do remember you saying that.
So I think that that's what we need. What we're doing now here is having conversation through us, but if we can encourage people to have their own ciphers and spaces to work things out, that's probably ideal.
Yeah. Ramy, you have received questions from many in the Muslim communities on your choice to include Mia Khalifa in your second season, with critiques on amplifying her voice on your show due to her political history and her time spent as an adult film actor. Can you tell us about why you felt it was important to include her this season?
Yeah, I mean, as always with what happens with this show, we felt it would be funny to include her, and even more so than important. This is in many ways a comedy first, and we really, we go for things that make us laugh and hopefully can bring thoughtfulness around certain things that we're trying to have conversations about. There's an interesting point that happens sometimes when we talk about this show, and it's not even a critique, it's more of a fact, which is that if this show was led by a woman, the level of hate that it would receive, and I'm not saying this show doesn't get a level of critique and a level of hate, but the level that it would get if it was led by a woman would be so much louder. Absolutely. And potentially violent, and in a way that is scary, like really scary. And I think the overall point around the Mia conversation is something that this show is always trying to do, which is looking at the way that we go after women much harder than we do go after men. That is the point that we were trying to amplify in a way that is funny, in a way with someone who is inarguably a pop culture icon, whether we like it or not. And that is the overall point. Now, within that point, you can have nuances as to whether you like the portrayal or not. Something we actually, there was something that we made a mistake with. We were using actually like an old statistic. There was of the Middle East watching or Muslim countries watching more porn. And that was actually our mistake. We ended up going back and pulling the word statistically out of the broadcast because, shocker, neither I nor Mia are statisticians. And so there was, if you can imagine the research team of Mia and Mia Khalifa, we made a mistake. And of course, the fact that stat would even be too believed in an episode, which is definitely steeped in surrealism, I would take all of it with the biggest grain of salt that you could find. And so, again, none of these things we're not trying to go after Muslim countries in any way. We're, again, just kind of trying to ask questions, which is there is this inherent double standard. And looking at it from the wildest ways. And if it bothered you, then it's even more of a reason to look at it. That's what we get excited about doing. And again, it sits in comedy first. And so I think there's been some critiques of it and people saying, well, why would you include her when she's done this and done this and done this? To be honest, there's certain things that have come up about her that I was not aware of. I don't know, I hadn't seen all of her work, but only knew some of it. And so not aware of the breadth of it all. But again, the point that we're trying to make, which we do in the show, again, through various ways to varying degrees of success, depending on how you want to look at it, is still to look at, again, the way that people go after women in a way that they don't go after men. And it is not, it's not to condemn or support even her, particularly as an individual. But I think she's undeniably sitting at the nexus of a bit of a pop culture situation that felt funny to explore, and all we can speak to, is wanting to do that in a way that only a comedy can do. Because that, what I love about comedy, and this is stuff that Maytha and I talk about a lot, and Maytha, I'd love for you to jump in on this, but what I love about comedy is that we can be wrong. That's what's fun, is that we are taking a risk and we are going at it in a way that we're allowed to, because it's a TV show. You know what I mean? We're not politicians. We're not authors. We didn't write it in a book. I admittedly didn't even finish school. So it's like, this is the place to come and watch somebody try something. It doesn't mean that it's always going to work or be right. But our intentions, I believe, again, like Amir said earlier in this conversation, are always about emotional truth. And I don't think anything that we did with her character betrays that. It is very much in line with the emotional truth of the show. But fact versus feeling, I feel like, is something that has been at the core of like discussions, Maytha, you and I have been having since, you've been coming out and seeing me do stand up probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was a little bit of a dramaturg for Ramy. People told me that I needed to do this thing called a compliment sandwich, but I would just launch in with all the meat. And I learned through Ramy what it means to take like the subtle truth and then put a lens of surrealism on it, and how much more of a hook that is for folks. So the show does play with surrealism to bring you into that internal universe that people are negotiating, that the characters are negotiating. I mean, you have the 9/11 episode, and he's getting wooed into the promise of American assimilation through like a blonde woman on a catalog with big boobs, right? That's not the best route for sure. But you get to see the decades of turmoil that happen with that decision and where this disintegration occurs. Now, for the Mia Khalifa episode, I know that we've gotten these comments that it feels so caricature to have the sheikh, or not sheikh. So this is the other weird thing in the Gulf, they call royals sheikhs.
Yeah.
That should tell you about
which we don't on the show. Yeah, which we don't on the show. We don't. Yeah.
Which is that should tell you about the level of caricature. Why would they call themselves a religious learned person as a form of a royal title, right? So one thing was that we were interested in doing like a big cat sort of scenario, but guess what? That's unethical to bring on leopards and jaguars onto a set, and that is something that's really real. I don't know if people know Emirati royals, but there are some things that are unsavory. But that was a way to get into this world of conflict that you feel from Zainab. That what is it? Well, and more so from Sheikh Ali. But what does it mean to get money from a donor who is that extravagant? And that's really the emotional truth, is like that level of extravagance actually is, how can you maintain that and be close to faith? And I think,
yeah.
No, that's it. Yeah.
No, because I was just going to say that economic point you're hitting on is obviously a big theme in the show. I mean, I think for the family, I mean, you have two kids, you know, one kind of closer to the middle of her 20s and one really basically at 30 who are still living at home. Like the economic disparity, that the stress obviously that happens, we see with our father in the show. And so I think a lot of what's at play in that episode are money dynamics. And so this is not what all Emirati people are like by any means. This is one Emirati character, you know, and I think something too, that would be, and yeah, but this isn't even what all royals are like too. I mean, I think that there is a variety. I mean, the royal family is massive. And to be honest, I think what we do with this character is even so sitting in surrealism that like, this might be what no one is like on a level. And I'm pretty sure people watching the show are smart enough to understand that, because I think what he is trying to highlight is he's also dealing with a spiritual issue that he's trying to solve. And so he's doing it in a bizarrely funny way.
And in a way, through again, a capitalist lens too.
And then through a capitalist lens, and through what does a spiritual problem for someone who has more financial means look like, and having to deal with, there's no one who pays someone to pray for them, any of these things, obviously, but we stepped into something. Yeah, we stepped into something surreal, you know? And so I think that's something that, and I've heard from Emirati people, some of them saying, why'd you make us look like that? Some of them saying, this was hilarious and this was brilliant. Again, it's like any of the things that we get at. This is one small moment. It is not the painting of an entire people. And again, that's where scarcity sucks for an audience, because if there aren't other options, then you start to just feel a certain way. And so that's where, you know, I get you and hopefully you get me too. And we can, you know, we can disagree.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that is kind of true that we did do wrong is the headdresses were off. That's not like headdresses they would wear in the Emirates, but it's only really like a Gulf person that would recognize that. And I'm not.
Oh, is that true?
The same. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Unfortunately,
I asked someone too from the Gulf.
You did? Whoops. Oh, yeah. Next time. Yeah.
We'll get it right.
Yeah, for sure.
So one common reaction, and you've already kind of alluded to this earlier in this conversation, to the second season of the show, was this deep frustration from the audience with the character of Ramy, who many feel is, you know, deeply flawed and maybe even unlikable. Like we were joking that when we posted for people to submit questions that we would just get, why Ramy, why? So I'm curious, why did you make Ramy such a difficult character to root for by the end of season 2? What was the thinking behind that?
I think it's really interesting what we expect out of characters who are not white, because I think that there is this framing and this expectation that, again, because we're feeling like, oh man, we need to make Muslims look good, we need to this, we need to that, what we're really looking at is someone dealing with his nafs, dealing with his ego. And so I think as we're constructing what we're doing here, we don't want people to think like, again, because we care about the portrayal of the faith, we don't want people to think like, oh, well, this dude is like the type of Muslim you should be, or something like that. We're watching somebody actively deal with ego, with nafs. And so in order to do that, we're watching him get into a mess of some sort. And so the reason why I bring up characters who aren't white is because I see characters like Ramy all the time and people call them complex. But for some reason, because he's not white, it's like, how dare he? Oh my God. You know, and I think that this is something, again, that comes from what we're comfortable with and what we expect from like needing to feel like model citizens anytime that we're being portrayed. I think that the character of Ramy, who is really, I swear to God, different from real Ramy, but the character of Ramy is what a lot of people go through. What a lot of people go through between intention and poor action, and what a lot of people who are drawn by their ego and their addiction and a lot of the things that whatever it is that they might be dealing with, and he's trying. And so we were really excited to dig a hole for him, because that makes it exciting. Like I remember, you know, just really like, you know, you get a lot of feedback and this and that, and someone said something so funny where they're like, what? Someone was like, what should the show be about? Someone deciding if they should pray 4 or 6 rak'ahs during early morning prayers. Like what should the what should the struggle be? You know what I mean? I mean, we are dealing with things that again, it's cool to be able to deal with them on a TV show, because these are the spaces that you can talk about them in the space of fiction. You can talk about things that are very real to a lot of people, that are very real to a lot of marriages, that are very real to a lot of men in this community. And ultimately, this show is about a man and does look at masculinity through various characters. And so to be able to, and as Amir put it so well, and Amir, I'd love you to jump in on this too, because we talked a lot about what would be most effective between Ramy and the Sheikh, and between just kind of showing this idea of like, what does the infantilized Arab boy look like? And why does he act the way that he does? These are things that really excite us, and things that, they're not, this guy's not, he's not, certainly not your elected representative, but definitely gives us the opportunity to dig into things that we're not talking about.
Yeah, it's when I've been talking about the things that attracted me to this, one of the things is Ramy's courage, not just being the lead actor and the creator of the show, but the show carries his name, you know? And if you see, you know, and it's not like he's in makeup or he's like transformed himself, like he's this great method actor and totally transformed himself for the role. Like when you look at the guy here on the screen, he looks like the guy from the TV show. It's like him, you know what I mean? And he lays on himself, on his likeness, such horrible, like all of the worst characteristics for them to be explored, you know? And in this season, even as opposed to the last season, is that in the last season, maybe the audience would have room to think that maybe the show is supporting the way that he demonstrating as if it's okay or some sort of ideal. But with the presence of the Sheikh as the moral axis that the show revolves around, that then we see, no, Ramy's like kind of not a good person. Like he's no, that's wrong. It's just, that's a wrong thing that he did, you know, or this wrong thing, that wrong thing, so on and so forth. And so then it becomes clear, you know, that he's, you know, not a, like you said, our elected representative of, you know, Islam in America or anything. But what that allows, what that opens, is like the message that he got on Reddit, where his guy's like, "Oh, this is a Muslim. Like, this is gonna be a breeze." You know what I'm saying? Like, we have like that manifestation instead of the manifestation of perfection, which is, you know, fake. But then he has to carry around that same face from the show. You know what I'm saying? All the time, and I was like, man, this is really like, I can't remember if you said this or someone said this about you, Ramy, but it's like a person who donates their body to science. Like, you know, they just.
I said that.
From the Slate article, right?
I said I was,
yeah.
Well, yeah, I said that pretty early on. I was like, I'm about to donate my likeness to the Muslim community and just, you know, the Muslim communities and, you know, pick it apart. Like, this is, go for it.
It's a trip because, you know, there's a famous text that we like to reference about you know, the purification of the heart. But anyway, in the purification has all the diseases of the heart, you know, and all the things that you do to help you, whether it's envy or pride or jealousy or whatever, you know. And instead of him being the representation of all the remedies, he's first the presentation of all of the ailments. This is what it looks like, and then you can look and say. You can look at yourself doing something, be like, this is what I look like when I do that. Like, this is what I look like when I do that. And by way of that, there is a spiritual, you know, instruction in it. And the relationship of the student or the murid or the disciple with the sheikh is that the sheikh is going to be, and just the tarbiyah, the spiritual education is going to be revealing the diseases of the self, and that's part of the purification. Just like a person does a physical detox, they may have symptoms of like bad breath and pimples and diarrhea or vomiting, where the body is purging itself. But before it could be beautiful and pure, it goes through this really ugly phase of filth kind of coming out. And so what this show does,
season two. Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna
say, you reminded me of this feeling like season 2 is like ayahuasca, basically. That's what people are going through.
Basically, there's a purging before the great mystical event. There's a very disturbing, painful, and ugly purging that happens. But most people are scared to have that on themselves. You can talk about it in the abstract, but many people are afraid to demonstrate inside of themselves. And there's a spiritual principle of not exposing your flaws and so on and so forth. So we have that in our religion. And so, but again, what he's saying about comedy, what Ramy is saying about fiction is now I can, take these attributes, put them on myself, put them on a person instead of an abstraction. And that's a means by which for us to see ourselves, because all of us, and I think this is why he becomes so unlikable. Is he so unlikable because he lies and none of the people who said that, they've never lied before? Or is it because he's given way to his desires and all the people who see that and dislike it, they've never given into their desires before? Or is it the converse, that I've lied before? This reminds me of what it looks like when I lie. It's disgusting. This is what I've given into my desires. This is what I look like. It's disgusting. So the what they dislike about Ramy, I think in general, is really the uncomfortable relationship of having to look at our nafs, our own selves, our own desires, our own weaknesses. And like I said, the show could be flipped. He could have put that on a different character. He could have been noble and, more amorous, like, what I'm saying? Like the stuff or something, what I'm saying? Or he could have made someone else, he could have made himself kind of flawed, but generally good, and then put all that on everyone else. But from season 1, before I was even involved in the show, and then especially, I think in season 2, it's like, no, I'm going to carry all of the filth of all the things that the nafs puts forth. And by way of that, perhaps that people will benefit from it. You know what I mean? At least laugh at it, and i.e. laugh at themselves and how foolish it is to be so nafsy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I mean, I always thought it would be crazy to make a show called Ramy, and I'm just like a good dude, like, being nice to baristas, and I like that would be insane. That would be so sociopathic.
Remember, we thought about the title being Majnoon. Like, that's really what we wanted to go for, or what we had the discussions around. I think the show is about emotional truth telling, but emotional truth, but it's also about truth telling, and how these characters always end up telling the truth at the worst possible timing. With the worst possible timing. So you have Maytha telling a trans person that she was essentially stalking them, and then when her partner comes and hears it, and then the police come, and that whole event could have been settled before that moment. And then you clearly have Ramy, because he felt this urge that he needed to tell the truth to Zainab about leading himself into what he did the night before their wedding. And I think that, like, a part of that is nafs, to selfishly say you want to unburden yourself from carrying the lie or from not exposing the truth. And that also lies in this place of this dissonance when private and public life are so segregated from each other. So how do you negotiate that? How do you move? And especially if you're contending with the truth and with the telling of that truth. So you see that happen with all the characters to a degree. So, I wonder if there is lying or there is very delayed truth, which is actually one of Ramy's big flaws, is that inclination towards really, really wanting to get it out there, but so much so because he wants to unburden his soul and not how it's going to land. And this is, again, that big gap between intention, between niyyah and action. and how action and impact are so essential to us really beginning to root in Nia. And this is part of the exploration that we're taking in terms of like the engineering of the soul through faith.
Yeah, no, I deeply appreciate that. And I could talk to you three for hours about anything, especially this. But I have just one more question for you today to kind of close us out. And it's been such a delight. My final question is, how has making the show impacted your own faith?
Maytha.
Wow,
I can go if you want.
Yeah, please.
It has navigating this show it's scary. It's scary because, again, we're taking risks. We're like I said, so much of this is, will this work? I mean, that's what I've been doing for like a decade with stand up. It's what Amir's been doing much longer with poetry. This is a high wire act of kind of trying to look at how something will work, but the high wire act is not how will it work with the audience. I think with the work that I hope to be doing with this and any work is does this sit right in my heart? Does this actually feel like it's doing what I intended it to do and to touch on the things that I wanted it to? And for me and my own spiritual journey, I'm first and foremost on a base rule. I'm like, man, I have to be better than fictional Ramy, which is thankfully like I feel an ability to do that. But I also feel like I continue to feel the need to be growing spiritually as much as I'm growing artistically, because I never want to feel like I'm using anything in the spiritual space of the things that mean something to me, and using that for profit or using that for even just artistic growth. There's something really disgusting to me about that, and there are so many battles we've had on this show, and they're not even the battles that you would think. So for me, my entire life, praying has been such a personal refuge, and it's something that I really connect with. I had a crisis of filming myself praying on camera. I was like, this is so weird. This is the thing that I do like with my sisters and brothers at the mosque. This is something I do alone. Now I'm filming it. And I had to really weigh that. I'm like, why am I doing this? And I felt the only images that anyone had ever seen of someone praying were tied to violence. They were tied to like weaponizing who we are. And I had to feel like, okay, there's so much greater value to showing this than not showing this, but that's hard because you kind of feel like you're giving away something that means something to you. And so the battles of making this show and the things that weigh on me are not, I think, the ones that an audience member might think, because I think a lot of the comedy stuff or a lot of the like risky stuff actually to us feels pretty clear cut in the medium that we're using and what excites us. It's small private things. And so I think for me, I've felt in many ways, because I've had to get clear about what we're doing here, I feel clearer in what I believe and who I currently am and who I want to be. And I see that gap clearer than ever, because we've had to articulate it through these characters. We've had to articulate these gaps that so many of us feel. And I feel very honored to get to do it and share it with the audience, because, we were joking about that one Reddit comment, but there have been very, very genuine connections that I've had with people over, how the questions we pose have brought them closer to their own questions. And that really outweighs, almost any other negative thing or any other accolade. There are certain personal messages I get that mean way more than any sort of industry recognition that the show could get. And that's in terms of my own real life, path. It's I'm like very thankful for that.
Yeah, this season the storyline of this season of the Sheikh character was really challenging, man, for me. One is, because when I'm thinking, okay, this is the character and this is the general idea, and then we're going to craft this character, I'm thinking of my Sheikh, right? Obviously. So I start thinking about that, and what would he do here? What would he do there? And it was challenging to do because it's hard for me to see him as a human being. It's not, like Sheikh worship thing. It's not that, but it's just like, for him to have fears or insecurities or anxieties. So like I can't. It really was. I couldn't make my mind get there.
Like seeing your teacher at the grocery store.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, you don't belong here. You have this little space that I've made for you, and you just have to live there forever. And so as I'm trying to, and obviously the character's going to have some sort of arc. So, what's going to happen and how does it, he can't remain the same, but my Sheikh, like in real life, just always remains the same. So I was like, how do we, and we were both very, Ramy and I, and everyone in the room, but, Ramy and I, we talked a lot about, I don't want like at the end, the Sheikh being like not a real Sheikh or like, this was all an act, and now, that not to be the dimension of the complexity of the Sheikh, particularly because, again, with this issue of scarcity, like if this is the one, that was one of the places where I was like, I don't want him to be a criminal or oppressor or any of that, right? So I'm trying to give nuance to this character, and I'm so challenged by it. And we're making progress. But it didn't really hit me until we were on set, actually. And Mahershala, he comes to the set, and anyone that knows me knows I only wear one thing, every day for probably the last decade. I wear all black. I have a very specific.
Dude, I saw you in a white T-shirt once, and I felt like something was wrong. Like I was like, did someone die? Like what happened? And you're like, no, I'm just about to put the black one over it. I was like, thank God, because this is like wild. Yeah.
The world was gonna fall apart.
I was like, whoa.
I dressed, like the way I dress. And I'm making a joke with him, like, you copying my style or whatever. Right? And he's like, yeah, like literally. And I was like, then it made it a lot easier for me because I was like, I can't think of him like my Sheikh. It would just be like if my Sheikh told me to open a Zawiya, like, Amir, I want you to open a Sufi center. Then I was like, got it. This is like, got it. I would make all kinds of mistakes. I would want to do it good, and I would try to be good, and I would try, but I would make errors. All that to say that it allowed me to know that where my Sheikh came from and where he is now, there was an arc. There was a place where he was and a place where he comes from a scholarly family, his father, his grandfather, so on and so forth. But still, there was a place of where he was and in where he is. And so also kind of in the converse of the Ramy character, if you find yourself, if I find myself, being in a way that I'm not proud of, I can say, if Ramy didn't give up, then, I certainly don't have an excuse, you know what I'm saying? But also, when I'm looking at the perfection of the Sheikh character, it's like that Sheikh had to have an arc. It had to start somewhere, And the things that he learned, like most of us when we learn things, is by making errors. That's the most fertile ground for gaining knowledge and wisdom is through mistake making, And even when we say like practice, I'm a practicing Muslim. I'm practicing Islam. In fact, I heard Brother Ali say this, and it always stuck with me. It's very profound. But he says, practicing means making mistakes. That's what the word means, We're just like rehearsal. This is a place where we're going to make mistakes before we do the full perfect presentation. So if we're practicing Muslims, meaning we're making mistakes, and that's a part of that's a valuable part of the journey. So if you find yourself making mistakes, alhamdulillah, you're on the path. If you find yourself not making any mistakes, you're probably gone astray. So if you find yourself, goofing up, then alhamdulillah, thank Allah, because maybe you're on your way to guidance, you know what I mean? And the road is being paved for you to arrive at the destination of having intimacy with Allah,
Yeah, alhamdulillah. For me, my own personal struggle, or, through struggle, we get closer to faith, hopefully. I don't know if I am, but was around really trying to shed a lot of that academic training of overemphasis on cerebral processing, just seeing the world through that lens, and also thinking through things in that really didactic way. We come from a pretty intellectual tradition that we discuss things on a very heady level as well, but it's grounded in a lot of soul work and talk, and in connecting with the heart. So for me, even working around characters and playing in the realm of imagining and bringing those characters, those dialogue, those stories to life was a practice of faith. It was not an external sort of exercise, which that's really the world of academia, is deconstruct. And there is then a little responsibility around how much water you have to carry. But when you are producing and constructing characters and stories, you're responsible to a degree. And it's like babies that you're raising into the world. People don't know how much of a hand you've had in the nurture of how they interact with other kids, or the ways that they might screw up on the sandbox, but they know they're your kids. So that takes a lot of faith to put pen to paper, to learn how to inhabit a moment of deep vulnerability, and then put that out into a screen. And the other parts of it too are, I don't know if people are curious about this, but really delving into, for me, Vicar, before, our names come out in the cast or in the credits, and as a form of protection around what people might imagine this work looks like. And so, that's upping that ante, thinking a little bit deeper of what the spiritual work is. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I could write a report that was deconstructing 100 years of Muslim tropes and traps. And then here we go. Here's a shot. Like, be a part of constructing, be a part of storytelling. That's, if anything, a really anti-capitalist thing is to be able to produce with your own hands something and to feel a connection to it. And I'm not saying that the show is or TV writing is anti-capitalist at all, but there's these interesting moments that artists have. And part of this work was the recovery of the artist that was beaten out of me to be super mechanical, to write within a formula. And clearly there is formula to TV writing, but what does it mean to play with the boundaries, with the surrealism that the show affords, with the exploration of, okay, let's put how your heart feels at the center of this storytelling. And as Ramy knows, this is still a journey for me, if I'm going to be honest, for this whole public, is really how to prioritize my heart, and to get in touch with the emotional world that I've been trained to sideline.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for your beautiful reflections. This is such a lovely way to end the conversation. Like I said, we could ask thousands of more questions, and I just really want to thank you for being with us today, and for your incredible candor and just willingness to wrestle with the complexity of being alive in 2020 with all the identities that we hold. So thank you so much. It's seriously such an honor to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you,
brilliant. Thank you, Arij, and all the pillars. This was amazing. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, folks. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys.
Assalamu alaikum. We also want to thank the audience for joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us for the season finale of Pillars Pop-Up Conversations. We are looking forward to curating and hosting more in the future. And we have so appreciated the candor, dialogue, and energy you've all brought to the series. So please make sure to sign up for our mailing list and follow us on Facebook to keep up to date on our events in the future. And we will certainly see you soon. Bye.